We went back to Boulder for two reasons. One, to get Burke, our 9-year-old, back in school so he could try to resume his life as best he could with his friends and in a familiar environment. And we wanted to find the killer of our daughter. And so we wanted to work with the police. And our attorney sat us down and said, "You don't understand. They think you killed your daughter."
Feeling lost?
Then you're in the right place.
I'm Amanda Knox.
And I'm Christopher Robinson.
And this is Labyrinth.
The murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey, the blonde, blue-eyed child beauty queen, was heard and felt around the world. It caused immense distrust in the police department of Boulder, Colorado, and elicited calls for officers to be fired. It's been the subject of documentaries, dramatized miniseries, and a TV movie. It's prompted countless theories and defamation lawsuits. But above all else, it led to unimaginable trauma for the Ramsey family, who, after losing their daughter, were demonized in the unforgiving court of public opinion for a crime they did not commit. To find our way through this complicated labyrinth, we'll be speaking with JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, as well as Joe Berlinger, the filmmaker behind the recent docuseries Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey, and author Mark Olshaker.
This case began on Christmas Eve, 1996 in Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey family, which consisted of John and Patricia Ramsey and their two children, 8-year-old Burke and 6-year-old JonBenet, were coming back home from a Christmas dinner at their friend's house.
Olshaker frequently collaborates with retired FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas, a pioneer in criminal profiling. Together, they have written many books about criminal and investigative psychology, including Mindhunter. Olshaker and Douglas explored the JonBenet Ramsey case in their book, The Cases That Haunt Us, re-examining evidence and offering their perspectives on the unsolved mystery. We turned to Olshaker to walk us through the initial investigation.
Patsy got up early in the next morning, Christmas Day, came down the spiral staircase into the kitchen to make coffee, and found what she said was a 3-page letter on the spiral staircase, a letter which is now famous, saying that, Mr. Ramsey, we have your daughter. If you want to see her alive again, you will give us $118,000 according to the instructions, which we'll give you tomorrow. Patsy immediately panicked, screamed, called up to John, then called 911. Police came, and they proceeded to wait for a kidnapping call, which never came. The house was flooded with friends and well-wishers, if you will, support people. And at one point, the detective on duty, Linda Arnst, said to John, well, why don't you just go look around the house, see if you find anything, which, of course, is completely against any reasonable police procedure. John and a friend went down to the basement, and in the farthest room in the basement, they found the body of JonBenet, bound, gagged with ligature strangulation, and also with her mouth taped with duct tape. As I say, she was bound. John tried to get it off. He ripped off the tape. He carried her upstairs to the living room where everybody else was assembled. And at that point, the police realized that she was dead.
Oh, my God. That is horrifying.
Absolutely horrifying. I mean, this was... Up until this point, this was an upper middle class, reasonably well-to-do family who had everything going for them, except the fact that Patsy was being treated for ovarian cancer at the National Institutes of Health, but she was in remission at the time. So this was really a very happy time for them until this absolute horror struck out of apparently nowhere. The ransom note was strange. It was 3 pages long, and it had all kinds of references in it. I interpreted the references to be popular culture references from television and movies at the time, like "Don't Grow a Brain, John" was from a movie that was currently out, a Keanu Reeves movie. Things like "Do not call the police, or your child will be beheaded." Now, who says beheaded? I suspect only people who watch, like at the time, Xena Warrior Princess or Hercules or any of those kind of shows. And in any event, this letter was full of pop culture references and also a lot of other things that just didn't make any sense. Now, the police asked for samples of John and Patsy's handwriting. They readily gave them 2 pads, two yellow legal pads, one that Patsy used and one that John used. Now, on the one that Patsy used, they found the beginnings of that letter again, the same kind of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey. And then clearly whoever wrote it didn't like what they saw, and then they started again. So it definitely, the letter did come from Patsy's legal pad, no question about that, which tells me, of course, that the letter was written in the house. By who? We don't know. Also, it's just statistically true that in most cases of homicide inside a house, the odds are great that it's going to be somebody close to the victim. So what? That means very little, except it meant a lot to the police.
That's insane to me. Wild. Wait, so how soon did the detectives start imagining that it was the parents?
Well, it's hard to say, but certainly within a couple of days. Now, Linda Arts, the detective who was first there, and this is totally bizarre, when John brought the body up into the living room and laid it on the floor, and she said she was facing John over the body, eye to eye, and she said she could see something in his eyes that said that he did it, and she was mentally calculating how many bullets she had in her sidearm, because she thought that everybody in the room could be dead. Now, this is just totally bizarre. I don't know where this comes from. I mean, and these are supposed to be responsible law enforcement officers. Now, here's the other part, and this, unfortunately, has a lot to do with your case, which is, this was a beautiful 6-year-old girl who had been involved in all kinds of kiddie beauty pageants. And almost immediately, as everyone by now knows, the pictures from this, and video from these beauty pageants, where this little girl is strutting her stuff, if you will, came out, and this was considered totally inappropriate by the general public and the police. And in other words, anybody who could put their children through this must be evil, or must be deranged or something. I remember you telling me that all the time you were going through your interrogation and trial, the Amanda Knox that they were describing had nothing to do with you, and yet occupied your body. So this was a very similar situation.
I mean, it's fascinating to me, because even if you are morally against a beauty pageant, there is a far difference between beauty pageant and murder. Like, how do you jump from one thing to the other? It seems very extreme.
A lot of people jump to this conclusion, well, gee, you're putting your daughter in beauty pageants. That must make you like a sexual predator, like accusing the father of, being, a sexual abuser of her child because they put their child in child beauty pageants, which is just so outrageous.
That's Joe Berlinger, director and producer of Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey, which explores the killing of JonBenet Ramsey and missteps made by the media and law enforcement.
the Ramseys gave blood samples, writing samples, it's just this narrative that they weren't cooperative, this narrative that they would only talk through a PR rep. They would only talk through their lawyer. Well, things started escalating very quickly. And, John got a call from a colleague, saying that the police think you did it within the first couple of days.
Boulder is a very safe community. They averaged one or fewer homicides a year. They did not have any real experience in homicide investigation. The lead detective who was assigned to the case, Steve Thomas, was actually a narcotics investigator. And he formed this opinion. God knows where it came from. His theory of the case was that JonBenet, who was known as a bedwetter, that with all the stress that Patsy was under from her cancer, from this strain of the beauty contest, maybe JonBenet had decided she didn't want to be in beauty contests anymore, that Patsy was supposedly living through. In any event, that in the morning when Patsy went to wake her up, found out that she had wet or soiled the bed, and in a moment of complete anger that any parent can probably identify with, struck her in the bathroom harder than she wanted to, and either this kid was either killed immediately or was so far gone that she was going to die, and therefore the whole case, the whole kidnapping, everything was staged. Now, there's a couple of things wrong with this, with this theory. Number one, the bed was when Patsy went up and found her daughter's room was empty and that she was not there. The bed had been slept in, but it was dry. So where does this come from? Number two, and this is the really important part, Amanda. This is to me the crux of the case. The medical examiner determined that death could have occurred from one of two sources.
Nobody knows the order of which came first, but she had a massive blow to the head. If the cause of death was a blow to the skull only, that would be much more mysterious, harder to pin down, and family potential guilt from a theoretical standpoint would be much more logical. But in addition to the massive blow to her skull, she had a garrote, which is a very sophisticated knot that you can tighten and loosen, embedded in her neck. It was so deeply embedded, her father didn't notice it initially when she found the body, when he found her body. So the fact that she was strangled, and there's such clear forensic evidence of a slow strangulation death. Back then, the idea that the parents could have done it when the crime scene involved this horrible, vicious, torturous death is just inexplicable to me.
Yeah, like you don't just out of the blue strangle your daughter and torturing her. Like I just, okay, all right. I'm a mom of young kids now, and I'm just like, what the living F?
Amanda, you're a mom. Most of us can conceive of momentarily getting so exasperated with your child that you slap them or hit them, and it's harder than you wanted, and they go sprawling into the bathtub or the toilet, one of the porcelain fixtures in the bathroom. Okay, that's conceivable. What's not conceivable is that a parent would put a ligature strangulation around a little girl's neck and twist it to the point that they strangle her, and at the same time abuse her vaginally. Now, how do we know that that was the method of death rather than the blunt force trauma? In the bathroom, in the little girl's room, down the steps into the kitchen, down the steps into the basement, all along the basement to the far end of the basement where the wine room JonBenet was found, there is altogether less than a teaspoonful of blood. Now, the head is a very vascular area of the body. There is no way, in my view, that you could have struck somebody hard enough to create an 8-inch fracture of the skull without massive bleeding, unless there was no blood pressure by that point. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the method of execution, the method of death, of murder, was the ligature strangulation. So now, Amanda, as a mom, can you imagine any parent under any circumstances torturing a child that way?
No. I am astonished that this ever became even a theory. Like, based on what? Like, did anyone, like, they had friends and well-wishers who were all there beside them trying to support them as they thought their daughter had been kidnapped. Assuredly, no one thought that these parents were capable of this. Like, what?
What this reminds me of, and again, this is going to hit very close to home, when I told you and Raphael separately that if you could, as the prosecution's theory of the case elaborated, if you all could come to the murder scene in Perugia, in the house that you lived in, the next morning with a bucket of bleach and a mop, and erase all of your and Raphael's invisible DNA, but keep all of Rudy Gadet's, you both deserve the Nobel Prize for Chemistry because it's impossible. And I maintain the same thing here. Go where the evidence leads you. And so from all of this, we can't say who the murderer was. What we can say is who the murderer wasn't. And that took a long time to establish. And many people still believe that the Ramseys, one or the other, was responsible for their child's death.
When dealing with the loss of a child, one only hopes a parent is allowed space and time to grieve. Unfortunately for John Ramsey, JonBenet's father, he was denied both. Through battling accusations from police and accusatory theories from the media, John Ramsey was stripped of any chance to properly grieve his deceased daughter.
We, actually had talked to them for several hours before. We moved into some friends' home who took us in that day, and the police were there 24 hours a day. We met with their so-called detectives several times for several hours, and so we were not refusing to talk to them at all. And where it came to a head was they wanted us to come down to the station. And I said, we can't leave. We're safe in this home. And, Patsy's comatose in bed. She can't even probably get out of bed. You come here and we'll talk. And they said, no, we need you to come to the station. And I'm sure it was part of their strategy to sweat the confession out of us. But a friend of mine was there. He was an attorney, and he said, wait, slow down. And he asked me, would you allow me to do some things that I think are necessary? And I said, you bet. And so he told the police, we're not coming to the station. We'll get back to you. And the next morning, he introduced me to my attorneys. And that's what he felt was necessary. So it really came to a head when our attorneys then said, okay, police, we want transcripts of the previous hours of interviews you've done with our clients. And they said, no, we're not going to give them to you. Well, that was an immediate problem because that's not right. They were obligated to do that. And then we didn't know this at the time. We were told this later, that they refused to release JonBenet's body for burial. And the police, my attorneys didn't tell me that because they knew it would be very upsetting. But that was going on. So my friend, the attorney, went immediately to the district attorney and said, "This is absurd, and you can't allow the police to do this." And he prevailed, and that they released JonBenet's body for burial. So there was an immediate distrust and anger established based on how they treated us. And we went back to Boulder for two reasons. One, to get Burke, our 9-year-old, back in school so he could try to resume his life as best he could with his friends and in a familiar environment. And we wanted to find the killer of our daughter. And so we wanted to work with the police. And our attorney sat us down and said, "You don't understand. They think you killed your daughter."
Well, doesn't it make a better story than an intruder breaking in?
I'm just astonished. I don't understand why this case ever even happened.
Doesn't a pretty girl and her good-looking boyfriend studying abroad in a drug-fueled sex craze, killing another beautiful girl in this, drug-crazed sexual freakout? Doesn't that make a better story than an intruder coming in, being surprised, and sexually assaulting and killing the one person in the house? I mean, unfortunately, and I know you've talked about this on a lot of your podcasts, Amanda. I'm reminded of the last line of the movie, of the John Ford movie, "The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance," when the James Stewart character, who was on the way to becoming vice president of the United States, and his whole career was started because he was a lawyer who was supposed to have killed the arch bad guy, Liberty Valance. In fact, it wasn't James Stewart; it was John Wayne who killed him. And when James Stewart finally tells the story to a newspaper editor, and he says to the editor,
"Well, you're not going to use this story, Mr. Scott?"
No, sir. This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
You can trace it all back to OJ and the JonBenet case. To me, this was the birth of opinion journalism that has taken over media today, that has been amplified by social media. Because there was once a time, not too long before this case, where there was kind of like this iron curtain between the news division of a network and the entertainment division of a network. And around this time, that line got awfully blurry. Network presidents realized that, news can make money. Because there was a time where news was like a public service that in exchange for an FCC license, the news division is supposed to give the news, and the entertainment division of a network and other media organizations is there for entertainment. But the line got awfully blurry. At the same time, you had this explosion of the cable universe. All of a sudden, there's 500 cable stations, in the mid-90s. The advent of the 24-hour news cycle. I mean, your story, you became a victim of this as well. But it all began at this time. An explosion of cable networks, the 24-hour news cycle, the feeding of this monster, the daily headline, And so in walks this case where, the tragic, 6-year-old adorable child, they think it's a kidnapping at first. They find the body, the father finds the body in the home. And then all of a sudden the parents are suspected, and just story after story after story of the parental guilt. They hired lawyers. They did this. They're not acting right. They were wrongfully convicted in the court of public opinion. as a student of how the media has developed over the last 3 decades, to me, this is like one of the foundational cases that has led us to a place today where the truth about any story has become so elusive. There was such tunnel vision in this case that I believe that the orientation of the investigation was to explain away and dismiss inconvenient facts that pointed away from the family. And in fact, one of the things the doc points out, one of the most outrageous aspects of the case, is that for months they were leaking these false stories that the press kept running with that kept incriminating the Ramseys.
They being the police. This, of course, happened in Amanda's case as well. Some way or another, the tabloids were regularly fed any and every new lead in the investigation, whether it was reliable or not, like dogs snatching up scraps from the dinner table. Everything from the titillating theory of a sex game gone wrong to random strangers coming forward claiming to have seen Amanda out and about, buying bleach or throwing olives in their faces.
They had a go-to guy in a little paper there in the area who would print anything that they told him, and he did. And the first fact, so-called fact that came out was that John flew his private jet back to Atlanta for JonBenet's funeral, and of course the media was like, how could a distraught father pilot his own jet back to Atlanta? Well, I didn't. I don't have a jet, number one. And so it was a false statement that this little paper put out. The real problem was the mainstream media used that as a source, and that became national news without any fact checking and so that was kind of the cycle that they used. They'd feed this one little paper reporter false information and misleading information. He'd print it, and then the mainstream media would pick it up. I saw an article, front page of USA Today, and it started out, it was reported in the Globe tabloid that, and I thought, holy mackerel, USA Today's using the Globe as a source for accurate information. That's crazy.
Well, they just want to sell the story.
Yeah, no, in fact, there was a media watchdog organization came out, I don't know, 3 or 4 years into this. It said the title of their headline was JonBenet Inc., the billion-dollar media industry.
On a CBS television special, which also included an FBI agent, and they concluded that Burke had actually done it. It was during the night. He was mad at JonBenet for some reason, possibly for eating some of his pineapple, which was in a jar in the refrigerator, and that he struck her so hard that he killed her. And then the parents staged this scene to protect Burke. Now, again, let's go back to the evidence. If he did this, where's the blood? Where was the blood in the kitchen or anywhere else? It makes no sense. And also, do you try to protect an 8-year-old who you know is not going to prison by elaborately staging this supposed kidnapping and sexualized strangulation?
It wasn't so much the police that distracted us from grieving. It was the media. And in a way, it was a blessing, I suppose, because we had to focus on, okay, how do we get Burke to school without him being photographed every morning? And so it became a task that we had to deal with every day because our homes were surrounded by cameras. Wherever we stayed, we had to move locations periodically because they'd find out where we were, and then they'd all swarm onto our friend's home, and that wasn't fair to them. So it was a distraction from grieving for sure. And the police accusations, it was noise level in our world at that point. As Patsy said, you cannot hurt me any more than I've been hurt by the loss of my child. So it doesn't matter. Say what you want. We were bewildered by their action, but it didn't matter. We just, whatever. We were just going to try to get up every day. In fact, the first thing that really got us up going again was the realization that we still had 3 children that needed us to be strong parents, stronger than ever. So that really got us going again as parents.
Never has more information been available at your fingertips, and never has the truth about so many things been so elusive. I mean, I worry about my kids. I worry about your young kids, what the state of the world will be in 10 or 15 years. But in general, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm talking about as it relates to the truth. The truth has become, a commodity, has become something that's, not definitive. And that's deeply troubling. If you're on the losing side of the argument and you spend lots of time going down rabbit holes, you got to remember, we all have to remember in this business that we do here, this is not just a piece of entertainment. This is somebody's tragedy. And you need to be responsible when you're telling the story of somebody's tragedy, or you're investigating somebody's tragedy. These are real people. So, let's honor the truth.
I had a national reporter early on. I told her, look, the real story here is not that a child was murdered. Sadly, we have a lot of that in this country. The real story is the failure of the police and what they've done to us. And she said, I can't go after the police. They'll cut me off from information. And I thought, that's tragic. That's a failure of your responsibility as a journalist. And I think, we have 18,000 police jurisdictions. Not all of them are good. Some of them are small. Some of them have no experience. So you got to be skeptical of what they're saying. And be critical, and not the real flaw in our country. And this, if what had happened in England had happened there, that happened to us, there'd be people in jail, in the media and the police. You can't prosecute people in the court of public opinion. It's fun because there's no defense.
And you tried to defend yourself. I saw that footage of you guys out there trying to defend yourself, but damn.
Yeah, we tried to for a couple of years, our attorneys wouldn't let us talk to the media. They're like, nope, that's part of our defense attorney requirement. There's no point in doing that. And they said, we can't do it. We don't know how to practice law in front of a TV camera. We do it in front of a judge. And they said, this is a real problem because you're getting tried in the court of public opinion.
By sensationalizing a gruesome murder and acting as a mouthpiece for the Boulder Police Department, the mainstream media only further obfuscated the truth. Today, John Ramsey and his son Burke push for the retesting of potentially crucial DNA evidence and continue to ask one fundamental question surrounding JonBenet's death. Why?
I want to ask about today, because you mentioned today there is DNA that could be tested, and there is apparently some resistance on the part of detectives today. So even though they have apologized to the Ramseys, and as far as we know, this is not a case that has been closed, it's still an open case. There's DNA evidence that could be tested but isn't. What's going on?
Yeah, well, look, I want to the police have come out with a statement saying they're putting all resources behind it, that they think they're going to solve the crime in 2025, that no lead is going unlooked at. So on the one hand, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but the family feels like they're not doing a lot, or they're not communicating. And so who knows what the police are actually doing. There were certain items that were sent to the crime scene back in the day that were tested that need to be retested. DNA technology has come a long way in the last 30 years, and this was a very compromised crime scene. There were items that were never tested that should be tested again. But the most important thing and again, this is a graphic description, so I apologize to the listener. The one piece of DNA that has animated this case is that in JonBenet's underpants, a little bit of her blood, because she was assaulted with a paintbrush handle, there's a little bit of her blood and her DNA mixed with some unidentified foreign male. And by foreign, I mean non-family member. So there is some DNA that's not a great profile. That's why anybody who has been eliminated by DNA needs to be relooked at, including the Ramseys. They would be the first to admit that, let's redo the DNA. I mean, they're the ones advocating for it.
John wants it reevaluated because now there are many more databases, as you well know. But the police just like in your case, the police dismissed this, would say, well, the DNA probably, we found out that the underwear was made in a factory in China, I believe. And so it was probably one of the handlers who was packaging it in the, where does it come from?
2 weeks after we lost her, the DNA lab reported that they'd discovered unidentified male DNA on JonBenet's clothing. And that was a huge problem for the police because it conflicted with their immediate conclusion that it was one of the parents. And so they spent a lot of money and time trying to find an innocent explanation for that unidentified male DNA. And in fact, they kept that fact a secret from the district attorney, and they should have informed him of that, but they didn't because it was a problem.
Yeah, it was exculpatory. That's a violation of your rights yes. Yeah, and in a case where so much was in the media, it's interesting or revelatory what the police were releasing, what the police were keeping a secret. I think another thing that I really relate to with your experience is in the presence of non-evidence, they substitute evidence with innuendo.
Unfortunately, as unbelievable as it is, it's more common than you'd imagine. In Amanda's case, the semen stain found on the pillow underneath Meredith Kircher's body was never tested. Had it been, it surely would have matched to Rudy Gaudet, whose DNA was found many other places in the crime scene. And in plenty of wrongful conviction cases, prosecutors have excused away such exculpatory DNA traces that point to another perpetrator by suggesting ludicrous and unprovable theories for how that DNA could arrive there. Suggesting that some other man left DNA on the victim, but through consensual or non-criminal means, and that this does not invalidate the guilt of the suspect whose DNA was nowhere to be found. Among those who do innocence work, this has become known as the unindicted co-ejaculator theory.
Here's another aspect of the case, Amanda, that even John and I were taken in by. Several years ago, around the time that Patsy was finally succumbing to her ovarian cancer, a new suspect arose. His name was John Mark Carr. He was a known pedophile. He was found in Thailand, where he was working in a school with little girls. He said that he had been with JonBenet and that the whole thing was an accident, and he loved JonBenet and he was spiritually connected to her, and all this kind of rigmarole. And the Boulder district attorney at that point, several incarnations beyond the ones who had been in charge when the case happened, they put in for his extradition. They brought him back to Boulder, and John and I said, well, they finally got the guy. And here's how we were taken in, Amanda. We didn't say they've got the evidence on him. We said, the Boulder district attorney has been embarrassed so many times, humiliated so many times by what's gone on. They couldn't possibly ask for an extradition unless they had this guy dead to rights. So they get him back to Boulder, they test his DNA, and guess what?
DNA didn't match, and he had to be let go. I was skeptical because I knew the DNA had to match to make it go forward. And I don't know, I was just skeptical that it would for some reason. I mean, he was a fishy character, and it was a compelling enough confession and information that made the DA find him and arrest him. But it made me realize this isn't going to be easy to deal with this. We're going to go through a trial. It's going to be a long trial. We're going to have to hear stuff that we don't want to hear and don't want to know, probably. And we had, probably a dozen cameras set up outside our house when that was announced that he was being arrested. And so we're going to have whole nother media events around this trial. This is not going to be easy. It'd be nice to have this chapter closed, but it's not going to be. We're not going to just pour champagne and celebrate the first time this person's arrested and charged as a suspect. It's going to be difficult, but this chapter needs to be closed. It's not going to change my life at this point. I'd like to close that chapter and end my media career, such as it is. And but it's going to make a difference for my children and my grandchildren. This cloud needs to be cleared up, then this chapter closed in their life too.
So you have the who question that is haunting you. Who is this person? Does the why question haunt you too?
Yeah, it does. We spent time with John Douglas, who started the whole FBI crime profiling program years ago. His profile, he said, look, this has nothing to do with JonBenet. This is about you, John. He said, this is someone who was very angry at you or very, very jealous of you and wanted to hurt you. And that was a pretty sobering analysis for me to grapple with. And but I think he's right. And
I think he's right too.
Yeah. The more Lou Smith, this really legendary detective that worked on it for years till he died, was a great man, by the way. So I think it was kidnapping gone wrong, real simple. And I always thought those are two conflicting theories, but somebody pointed out, well, they're not really conflicting. It could have been the same objective. It's just the kidnapping, as Lou said, something went wrong.
Right. It was harder than he expected it to be.
There was two FBI retired profilers that analyzed the note, the writing in the note, not so much the handwriting, but the content. They didn't look at anything else. And they have a really interesting podcast on it, which I listened to, and they pretty much agreed with John Douglas's theory profile. They also added that they think it was written by a male, and they said this person was in fantasy land. They were trying to create what they might see in the movie as a kidnapping. The ransom note being a 3-page dissertation.
It wasn't a manifesto, like.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, it sort of was. And he said probably a young guy, 20s to 30s, infatuated with movies, and also would have shown it was a psychopath, had no remorse, but also would have exhibited psychopathic and schizophrenia, but sadistic behavior in the past. This is a sadist, and as well, and you would have seen that in his history.
Right, but he was fixated on you. Like, I think the thing that the media did so horribly is they also helped push this theory that it was about JonBenet. It was about her bedwetting. It was about her being a beauty queen. And it's just and it wasn't ever about her at all.
No, that's that's, say, the best of the best have said that. So you're absolutely right. And so I think that helps refine the search a bit for the killer. And as I say, it's difficult for me to look back and say, what could I have done to make a person feel that way towards me? And in fact, John Douglas said, you may not even know him. This jealousy and anger may or may not be somebody you know or have ever come in contact with face to face that you knew about.
God, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah, it is. And, we were a relatively large company in a small town, and we'd been in the newspaper 2 weeks before JonBenet's death about our achievement of a sales goal, which we were proud of. In fact, it's funny. Well, it taught me to pay attention to my gut feelings too. We had, we were a distributor of products, computer products, and you have to sell a lot of computer products to make a little bit of money in that business. And kind of like a grocery store, you have to sell a lot of milk and eggs to make a little money. And we did $1 billion in revenue in December, which we were proud of. And our marketing lady wanted to put it in the paper. And I just had this gut feeling, ooh, that's not a good idea. But, there's some pride, I guess, honestly, for me, and then wanted our employees to be proud of their company. So we put it, they had the paper ran an article on our company, had a picture of me. And that might have been a huge mistake. And I had a gut feeling that was a bad idea. So don't know if that's what drew attention to me or not.
That's interesting that you had a sort of spidey sense that something bad might happen.
Well, it just was like, I'm sure you've had gut feelings too, and you can't really explain them, but it's like, it doesn't feel right. I'm not sure why. It seems right to me, why it should be right. Yeah. But your gut's saying, no.
And it's not like it's front page headline breaking news. And it's in the business section, what,
And we didn't consider ourselves rich. We had sold our interest in this little company or my little interest in this company to Lockheed, and they were wonderful to us. But I was still working, still drawing a paycheck, and didn't really think I was filthy rich, but I think we were perceived as being, I'm president of $1 billion company, therefore I must be a billionaire. Well, that wasn't true at all. I didn't even own the company at that point. I was just an employee. But I think that tainted it as well. But the beauty pageant stuff, that just added fuel to the fire. Basically, it was more juicy for the media. And, for Patsy and JonBenet, it was just a fun thing for mother and daughter to do. Patsy was very extroverted, a wonderful mother too, by the way, amazing mother. And she was so vilified, which is so unfair. But and JonBenet was very extroverted. She was like, ta-da, I'm here. She was more. Yeah, and she and her friends had a little chest of costumes and stuff, and they'd put on shows for us. They'd come down at dinner time and say, "Oh, we got another show for you. You got to pay attention." And and they'd put on costumes and have a show. That was her personality. But so she had fun doing it, and we joked. We said, "Man, JonBenet's got to lose some of these pageants because she's got to understand you don't always win in life." We weren't. We were kind of hoping someday she wouldn't win, but she was so good at it. But it was a fun thing for them to do together.
What do you feel today?
I just want to know why and who. It'll close a chapter for us, but you don't get over the loss of a child, regardless of how they were taken. And But we just need to, for the sake of my family's reputation, we need to have an answer.
Do you feel like a part of you is also driven by the desire to protect Patsy and Burke?
Well, certainly Burke. I mean, Burke's suffered because of the accusations that have been thrown his way. And he's never mentioned it. In fact, it never seems to have bothered him a great deal. But he's mentioned it a couple times recently where, some friends of friends were having a party, and my friend said that their friends didn't really want Burke to come to the party because he might be a child killer. I mean, crazy stuff. But he's starting to feel like it's a cloud over his head. And that's horribly unfair because even the police, he was 9 years old, he was a little kid. And even the police said, no, it's nonsense. He had to be interviewed by a child psychologist that was associated with the police early on. And he spent a couple days with this person or persons, and they came out and said, absolutely no way. Did he have any knowledge of this or any awareness of it? And he's just a normal kid. And so he was never, ever, ever thought to be a possibility by even the most incompetent police.
That was just a media invention.
The media did it. And that was even more juicy. And it was horribly unfair to Burke. And so I want to clear this up for Burke's sake. And my oldest son is named John Ramsey. And that's taught me you should never name a child after yourself. Just in case. Yeah, it's not a good idea. Let them set their own stake in the world. But he's had that little extra burden to live with, and he's really been involved in trying to wrestle this to the ground too. And I'm grateful for it because he's helped pick up the flag for me. You get weary. How
concerned are you with your own legacy?
I'm not concerned. I mean, no, it doesn't concern me at all. We have lots of friends, and they've stuck by us. What was really interesting too is that even though we were getting crucified in the media and the police were throwing all these accusations out, people on the street were wonderful to us. Early on, from the very beginning, people stop and say, oh, I'm so sorry what's being done to you and said about you, and it's not right. And so we were overwhelmed with people's kindness. Really made me a more compassionate person too. Everybody carries a burden, I've learned, or will carry one at some point. It's a storm in life you deal with, and we all have them.
You can find Mark Olshaker's The Cases That Haunt Us and John Ramsey's The Other Side of Suffering anywhere books are sold. You can watch Joe Berlinger's documentary Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey on Netflix.
In the meantime, get lost with us. Find us on Bluesky at amandaknox.com.
At wisecracker.bsky.social.
You can help support our work just by following or subscribing to Labyrinths wherever you listen to your podcasts. And sign up for our free newsletter at amandaknox.com to get the latest on all our work.
Labyrinths is brought to you by Knox Robinson Productions. This episode was written and produced by us. Our managing producer is Andre Sapp, our assistant producer is Charlie Darnell, and our theme music is by Josh Budo Karp.